Hey guys, my name is Kyle. Welcome back to another video on sequelize ORM. In this video, we're going to cover creation of a user. So in the last video, we covered creating the post route that actually tests to make sure that the user information we want is there. Now, in order to test this, we are going to need to download a piece of software. So I already have this downloaded, but what you're going to want to download is a piece of software called Postman. And Postman is a great HTTP client that allows you to query different API routes and see what the server would see when it queries an API route. So if you Google Postman, you're going to see it right here. Hopefully there's something that says something along the lines of download Postman. It looks like, ooh, Chrome might even have an extension. I don't have this. What is this? Well, that's really cool. Chrome does have an extension. I don't need the extension. I'm just going to go ahead and use the actual downloaded app. But hey, if you want to use the extension, by all means. But yeah, this is what you are going to need. So Postman. Looks like it's getpostman.com. Once you have that downloaded, go ahead and open it up. We're going to test to make sure this route is actually reachable, and we're going to see what it's going to throw back for us if we don't have any of this stuff available. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and start our server. So we will run npm run debug and let our server start up for us. Now, because we have sync available, we're going to see the SQL run through real quick. But remember that if you look here, so we have it breaking, so let's let it play first. We'll see it real quick. Uh-oh, we have an error. Router.post. Uncapitalize, please. So we will see it still run this DB stuff, this SQL, but remember that right here, it only creates the table if it doesn't already exist. So because it does exist, this is just going to run and then be done. Okay, so our server is up and running. If we go into Postman and we change this to post, okay, and we're going to type in localhost, because remember we're running this on our local machine, and then here you're going to need the port that you actually used. So if you look in app.js, or not app.js, sorry, www, you can see the port. Where is it? Port. Alright, so I'm using port 3000. For you, this might say something like process.port or. So this is not uncommon to see something like that. And I just changed it, which means it's going to re-save. So, okay. Well, let's get rid of this now. Let's go. Alright, so unfortunately I changed it, which means it's going to restart, and I'll have to wait for this to actually restart. But this is the port that you need to query. So we're going to say localhost :3000 /users/. So this is coming from, if we remember, we look at app.js. We have our gateway right here, so /user, and then in our user gateway, our post route is just /. So, did you restart yet? What's going on? Oh, it didn't have to. Okay, I think it's running. So if we query this, is it actually running? Okay, solution figured out. Just be aware that, this happens. I had named this /user, and I was typing in here /users. So make sure to get rid of that S, and we should be good to go. We'll send it through, and it should send us back something that looks like this. How do I... Okay, so here we're seeing first name can't be blank, last name can't be blank, username can't be blank, password can't be blank, email can't be blank. So we're good. We're doing great. We know that this particular route is working for us. So now let's move on. All right, so this is what our user process for creation is going to kind of look like right now. This is really basic, but basically we want to do any user validation, and that's what we're doing here in the API route. We're validating that all of this stuff exists, and we're good to go. So this is kind of taken care of. We can mark that as done. Okay, next we want to check if a user exists, and this consists of two different things. So first we want to check if a username is already taken, and secondly we want to check if an email is already taken, because we don't want two usernames with this, or two users with the same username or the same email ever. These need to be unique characteristics. And then finally we will go ahead and create our new user. Very basic here. So let's go into our editor, and I'm going to close all of my directories because I have so many of them. And we're going to create another directory called tests. So let's create a directory, and we'll call this one tests. And inside of this directory, we're going to place a new directory called user tests. And this is where I'm going to put all of my different user tests. Now, okay, so if you Google mocha chai, sounds like mocha chai latte. Okay, if you Google mocha chai and then you go to their website, all right, you'll see that we have npm install chai, but I am also installing Mocha, the testing framework, as well. And we see that we can do should, expect, assert, yada, yada, yada with this. You don't need to do testing. I say that like, okay, so you don't need to do testing, technically. I highly encourage you to test your development before you launch things into production. It will save you a lot of time. The biggest reason that I advocate for test-driven development is it kind of prevents you from writing more than you need to, and it forces you to think like this as soon as it actually loads. It forces you to think like this. So instead of, oh, let's just check if a user already exists, we're going to have one function that checks if a username is taken, and we're going to have another function that checks if an email is taken. We don't really want to do this all inside of here, because then it becomes harder to test. So these are just going to be atomically testable units. I find that writing tests helps you think in this manner. So once those are both installed in user tests, we're going to create a new directory, a new file. And that file is going to be called, it's not a JavaScript file, sorry. Just create a new file. And that file is going to be called user.test.js. And I'm not trying to make things overly complicated. You could probably put this up here. So it could be tests, and then you could just have user.test.js inside of here. I just create a directory. That way, if I do create a second file, like user tests2 or whatever, but it's still related to users, it's going to be in this directory. Now, this is where I do kind of require you to know a little bit about testing. If you don't want to actually write the tests, then you can just follow along with me to make sure that they work. I can test right in my IDE, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use Mocha. So let's stop our server. And real quick, I'm going to npm install --save-dev Mocha and chai. But if you can't test in your IDE, then I would definitely tell you go to chai, and it will tell you how you can test these different functions in, let's say, the terminal instead of in an IDE. Okay? So in user tests, I'm going to require in expect. So we'll say const expect equals require chai. And I actually think that this is a object off of it, so we have to write that. All right, so const expect equals require chai, and then we're going to write our first test suite. So describe user test suite takes in a function, and we can already see that a little error showed up here because it's like, hey, this is a test. I can run that. So it should see if a user already, sorry, not user, but yeah, user already exists. Okay, now we're actually going to create a second function that dives even deeper than this. So this is, again, why I created user tests, because now we're going to create a new file called user.db.test.js. And you can imagine what we're going to do with that. So let's go ahead and take the contents of this and copy it into here, except this is going to be user DB test suite, and this should see if, so should see if a username already exists in DB. And then this is actually going to get passed an asynchronous function. Okay, so now let's go into, actually let's not go into it just quite yet. Yeah, let's go into it because I don't want to require the database into here. So in our, where do I want to go? Services, users, user DB. All right, so we're going to require our DB handler, the main DB handler that we exported from index of models. So we kind of really diverted from sequelize for a while here now, but we are coming back. Okay. So remember that our index.js file is exporting this DB object. So now in user DB, we're going to require that. So we're going to say const db equals require up, and then up one more, models, and we're good to go. Now we have access to that database object. So So let's create our first function then. So function, async function, and let's call function, and we'll say does username, or no, actually we'll just say username exists. Okay, and then we're just going to export this function. So we'll say module.exports equals an object, and we'll say user exists. All right, now let's go into our userdb.tests. So this is going to say, should see if a username already exists, right? So first, let's require that in here. So const, and then we're going to use some destructuring here. User name, I searched. User name exists equals require up, and then use services /users / user db. All right, so let's take any So now let's take any random string of text. So we're going to say const check equals username exists, and this is an asynchronous function, so we'll say await username exists, and we're going to pass in some random string of text. So I'm just going to type here. Okay. And we should say expect check to be false. I think to be false is. If you're unsure, let's look at their API. Okay, so here we go, to be false. So we expect this to be false. And we want to validate that this is actually true, or that this can actually fail. So we don't want this to be null or undefined. So we'll say expect check dot, so check equals undefined dot to dot be false. Okay, and we don't want it to be null either, so we'll say expect check equals null dot to dot be dot false, because we want to make sure that this can actually fail. So if I run this, and it'll probably take a second to actually run, it's going to fail because we know that username exists right now is returning undefined. And that's because we haven't actually written anything into it. So username exists. Oh, username exists is not a function. Let's make sure. So userdb, go here. User exists. So let's change this to username exists because that makes more sense. And save. And then we'll go back to userdb tests and we'll run this again. And it will run the tests, or test as it is. And awesome. So expected undefined to be false. So this particular function should return true or false. Okay, so let's write a little description here. Function checks if username already exists in database. Returns true if username already taken, false otherwise. Okay, so that's what this is doing. We're going to collapse that real quick, and we're now going to pass in a username to this. So username. So now we want to make this test pass. Now that we actually have made sure that it can fail, we want to make it pass. So how do we make this pass? Well, we need to reach into the database and check if this username is already taken. How do we do that? In userdb, we're going to call the db function. So first things first, though, we have a parameter. If this parameter wasn't passed, we failed. So let's make sure that that is going to be there, right? So we're going to add a function now. Actually, no. Let's make it pass first, and then we'll worry about adding that function. All right, so we're going to contact the DB. So await. Let's assign it to a variable. So const user equals await db dot user dot find one. Okay, and then let's add some stuff in here. So we're going to say where username, oh, it's an object, username, and that's it. So we're going to reach into the user table. Well, let's see here. We're going to reach into the database, and then we're going to look at the user table via the user model. Okay, remember this is called user. Where am I? And then we're going to call this find one. So there are a couple of these finds, and you really can think about them like select all or select one. Okay, so let's look at sequelize. I'll point you back to the documentation. Well, I don't particularly like a lot of their documentation because I think there's just so much of it. I do like their documentation because there is so much of it. So this is a really well documented library. There's just a lot of it, and it can be really hard to figure out where everything is sometimes. So let's look at querying. Okay, so we see that we have find all, and even they are very good about telling you, okay, this kind of means select, or this means select, let's see, or find one. Well, they don't really say find one. There is a find all, there is a find one. And then they're kind of like where, well, that's really self-explanatory, right? Because if we were doing this in the actual database, we might write something like select star from users where, right? So I don't know, username equals something. So this is the query that we basically want to write. And you can see how well this maps to sequelize, because we're basically saying in sequelize, select, so db.find1, so select one, where username. Okay, so we'll do that, and then we're going to say if username, or if user returned user. All right, else return false. All right, so now this should pass. We've written the minimum amount of code to get this to actually do what it needs to do. Technically, we've actually written a little bit about than the minimum amount. The minimum amount was this. Okay. Primitive value returned for constructor will be lost when called with new. So, if we go back to user db test now and we run this, it's actually going to pass. There is no username in our database with this. So now let's look at some of this. Okay, so we can see what was being called. We can see it saying select ID, first name, last name, username, password, yada, yada, yada. And then we actually see over here, it says where user.deletedAt is null and username equals, so we see this passed in text. So this right here, user.deletedAt is null, is remember that because we have paranoid in here, there's a deleted at column and it won't be set until we delete it. And finally, it says limit 1, which is the find 1. So find all would be select star from where, and find 1 is select star from where limit 1. All right, so this is now passing. We're good to go on that.